I'd like to say the trip was spontaneous, but the truth is I'd been planning to disappear for months. Burnout isn't the right word. Erased feels closer. I'd stopped feeling anything. Joy, anger, even hunger came late. My job as a software analyst had turned into a loop of meaningless deadlines. My girlfriend left last spring, and I hadn't spoken to my friends except through muted group chats. So, when I found the listing for the cabin, it felt like an answer. It was tucked somewhere in northern Vermont, miles off the main road. The photos showed a small wooden house, pale blue window frames, and a deck facing endless forest. Perfect solitude, the description said. I wanted that. I wanted silence. I left before dawn. The highway was almost empty, and for a while I felt something close to peace. When the GPS told me to turn onto a dirt road, I hesitated. No signs, no other cars, just a single track winding between trees so dense they swallowed the light. The further I went, the more the reception bars on my phone disappeared until there were none. By the time I reached the cabin, fog had rolled through the forest. Everything was damp and muffled, like the world had been wrapped in cotton. The cabin stood alone on a patch of flattened grass. No neighbors, no power lines. Just trees. Inside, it smelled of pine and dust. A single bedroom, a small kitchen, a bathroom that barely fit one person. The decor was simple, wood everywhere, and an old mirror over the fireplace that looked slightly warped, like the glass had melted once and cooled wrong. I dropped my bag, opened the windows, and listened. Nothing. Not a bird, not a plane, not even wind. Just the slow tick of the clock above the door. I told myself that was the point, to be alone. To hear nothing. But already, a small part of me missed noise. I made dinner from canned soup, drank a beer, and sat on the deck until the sky went black. The stars were sharp and close, like you could pluck one down. I almost convinced myself this would help me reset. Then came the sound, a single crunch of leaves, close from the edge of the treeline. I froze. Another step, slow, deliberate. I shone my flashlight but saw only fog and dark trunks. Maybe an animal, I thought. Deer. Fox. Anything normal. I went back inside, locked the door, and told myself to relax. Yet when I lay down, the sound came again, footsteps circling the cabin, brushing against the outer wall. I held my breath until silence returned. When I finally slept, I dreamed of standing outside the cabin, staring back at myself through the window. Morning brought thin sunlight through the mist. The forest looked different, less like scenery, more like something watching. I tried to shake it off. Coffee helped. I spent the morning reading an old book left on the shelf, some forgotten thriller whose pages had yellowed. Around noon, I decided to walk. There was a trail behind the cabin that led deeper into the woods. After 10 minutes, I found footprints. Not mine, they were larger, deeper, recent. I crouched to examine them, but the soil was too soft to tell which direction they led. When I looked up, I realized the trees around me had grown closer together, as if the forest had shifted. A faint ringing started in my ears, and for the first time, I felt dizzy. I turned back, following what I thought was the same path, but ended up looping twice before spotting the cabin roof through the branches. Relief hit hard. Back inside, the clock above the door read 4:15 p.m., but my watch said 3:40. I checked my phone. No signal still. The battery was already at 70%, even though I'd barely used it. That night, I left the porch light on. At 1 a.m., I woke to tapping on the window. Soft, rhythmic. When I looked, there was nothing, just condensation on the glass and a faint handprint fading from inside, not outside. I didn't sleep again. I woke late, heavy-eyed. The first thing I noticed was the mirror above the fireplace. Something about it felt wrong. Maybe it was the light, but my reflection seemed delayed. When I moved my hand, there was a fraction of a second before it copied me. I blinked, and it was normal again. Sleep deprivation, I muttered aloud. The sound of my voice startled me. It had been nearly 2 days since I'd heard another human voice. To distract myself, I went outside to gather wood. I found the same footprints again, circling the cabin this time closer than before. I measured them against my boots. They were identical. That night, I tried not to look at the mirror. I read until the words blurred, then turned off the lamp. The silence pressed on my eardrums like weight, and then, faintly, a voice whispered my name. I sat upright. Who's there? Nothing. Just wind slipping between the boards. I told myself I imagined it, but then it came again, softer, almost inside my head. Ethan. I ran to the door, yanked it open, and shouted into the dark. My voice vanished into fog. No echo, no reply, just stillness. When I turned back inside, the mirror caught my eye. My reflection was smiling. I threw a blanket over it and didn't move until morning. I woke to knocking. Not on the window this time, on the front door. I nearly tripped rushing to answer it. An older man stood outside, gray beard, flannel shirt, holding a metal bucket. Morning, he said. His voice was gravelly slow. Didn't expect to see anyone here. I told him I'd rented the cabin online. He frowned. Rented? That place hasn't been listed for years. My stomach dropped. Maybe the listing was new. I booked it a month ago. He rubbed his chin. No one's lived here since the winter the Johnson boy went missing. I laughed awkwardly. Guess they reopened it. He looked past me into the cabin, eyes narrowing. You might want to leave before dark. Roads get strange out here. I asked what he meant, but he just shook his head and walked back into the trees. The sound of his boots faded quickly, swallowed by the forest. When I checked later, there were no footprints where he'd stood. That night, I heard two voices outside the cabin. One was his, raspy, calm. The other sounded exactly like mine. The power flickered around noon. Lights dimmed, the refrigerator clicked off, the radio spat static. Through the noise, I heard faint breathing, slow and human. I unplugged everything. I wanted to leave, but the car wouldn't start. Dead battery. I hadn't left the headlights on, I was sure of it. I spent hours pacing, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did until sunset. Then came the sound again, footsteps around the cabin, moving in circles. I shouted, slammed the door, even fired the flare gun I'd brought for emergencies. The red light painted the trees blood-colored for heartbeat, and I swear I saw a shape between them, tall, pale, almost familiar. When the flare burned out, it was gone. Inside, I noticed the blanket I draped over the mirror had fallen. My reflection looked exhausted, eyes sunken. But when I raised my hand, it stayed still. Stop, I whispered. It smiled. I didn't sleep after that night. Every noise, every creak felt deliberate, like the cabin was breathing with me, waiting for me to stop. By morning, my reflection had returned to normal. Or maybe I'd just convinced myself it had. I tried to eat breakfast, but couldn't finish a single bite. My stomach churned. The air inside the cabin felt thicker than before, heavy, as if saturated with moisture I couldn't see. I opened the door to let in light. The fog was thicker than I remembered, rolling between trees, low and slow. Something about it felt alive, as though the forest had lungs. That's when I noticed the footprints again. Not one set, two. One matched my boots exactly. The other was bare, long, thin, spaced like someone who knew how to move quietly. They circled the cabin and led toward the woods. I don't know what possessed me, but I followed. The forest was silent. Even my breathing felt intrusive. The deeper I went, the darker it grew, the trees leaning closer, as if eavesdropping. After a few minutes, I saw it, a small wooden shed half-collapsed under moss and rot. I shouldn't have gone inside, but I did. The smell hit first, damp paper and decay. Then I saw the notebooks. Dozens of them stacked against the wall, each one warped by moisture. On the first page of the top notebook, in faded pencil, was a name. Ethan Cole. My name. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. The handwriting matched mine. Each entry was dated years apart, 2009, 2015, 2021, all describing the same events. The footsteps, the mirror, the man in the woods. The last page was written in a shaking scrawl. If you're reading this, it means you came back again. Don't stay after the fifth night. It learns you. It copies you. Leave before sunset, or it will take your place. Something snapped behind me, with breaking, soft breathing. I froze, heart hammering. Slowly, I turned toward the door. Nothing. Just fog drifting through the open entrance. When I stepped outside, the footprints were gone. I sprinted back to the cabin, grabbed my bag, and threw everything into the car. The battery light flickered red, but the engine started. Relief flooded me. I hit the gas and followed the dirt road back the way I came. 5 minutes later, I saw the same bent pine tree I'd passed earlier. 10 minutes after that, the same fallen log. Then the cabin came into view again. I slammed the brakes so hard the tires skidded on gravel. My chest tightened. I turned the car around and tried another direction, faster this time. Same result. No matter how far I drove, the forest bent back on itself. When I stopped, I could hear the engine ticking, cooling down. Underneath that sound was something else, soft humming, like a person trying to mimic a tune they barely remembered. It was coming from the woods. I locked myself in the cabin, checked every corner, every window. My own reflection stared back from the mirror, motionless, calm. "Stop it," I whispered. "Stop copying me." It tilted its head, just slightly, like it was listening. Then it moved before I did. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The reflection smiled, slow, patient, knowing. Then it lifted a hand and pressed its palm against the glass. I don't know why, but I reached out too. When my fingers touched the surface, it was warm. That night, I opened the notebook again and read every line until dawn. The earlier entries told a pattern. Every Ethan had stayed 5 nights. Everyone had heard the voices, seen the mirror twist, felt the forest move. And everyone had vanished on the 6th. Some entries had sketches of the thing, human-like, but not quite. The notes said it could only enter once you acknowledged it, once you looked too long. It learned your steps, your voice, your handwriting, until it didn't need you anymore. I burned half the notebooks in the fireplace, but the smoke didn't rise. It sank, curling back toward me. I swear I heard whispers inside it. That's when I realized the cabin clock had stopped at 2:47 a.m. It never ticked again. A knock at the door jolted me upright. I almost ignored it, but then a familiar voice said, "It's me, you." I froze. The voice sounded exactly like mine. Same tone, same cadence, even the same nervous edge. "Open the door," it said again, softer now. "You're not safe in there. It's not the real cabin." I held my breath. The doorknob began to turn, slow and deliberate. I ran to the back room and barricaded myself. The knocking stopped, but now footsteps moved inside. Calm, confident, pacing like someone who knew the space. It whispered my name again, but this time, the voice came from every wall. When I dared to look into the mirror again, it was gone. The reflection, the room behind me, nothing. Just endless forest. I stopped keeping track of time after that. My phone battery drained even though it was off. The air felt charged, like static before a storm. I could hear voices outside, dozens of them now, all whispering the same thing in different tones. "Come out, Ethan." Every time I blinked, the cabin seemed smaller. The walls felt closer. When I opened the door, the forest was right there, not steps away, but inches. Something was pressing its face to the window, just out of focus. I couldn't see its features, but I knew it was me. I grabbed the flare gun and pointed it at the glass. "Leave me alone." I screamed. The thing smiled, the same twisted, delayed smile from the mirror, and whispered, "You already did." I fired. The flare shattered the glass, and the room filled with red light. When the smoke cleared, there was no one there. But the reflection on the shards of glass still showed me, still moving, still smiling. I must have blacked out, because when I woke up, sunlight was pouring through the broken window. Everything looked normal again. The fog had lifted. Birds chirped outside. For a few minutes, I convinced myself it was all a dream. I packed, started the car, it worked, and drove. This time, the road led out of the forest. I almost cried with relief when I saw pavement again. Civilization. Signal. People. When I stopped at a diner in the nearest town, the waitress smiled politely and asked where I'd come from. "The cabin up on Hollow Creek Road," I said, her face drained of color. "There's no cabin up there anymore," she whispered. It burned down 3 years ago. I laughed, too loudly. No, it's still there. I just left. She backed away slowly. You should go, she said, almost under her breath. We don't talk about that place. When I checked the map on my phone, the road wasn't listed. Neither was Hollow Creek. Back in the city, everything felt off. My apartment looked the same, but the lights hummed louder, colors seemed slightly wrong, too warm, too vivid. I tried to sleep, but my dreams kept replaying the cabin. The mirror, the fog, the whisper. I kept waking at 2:47 a.m. every night, gasping for air. One morning, I caught my reflection staring at me again. I blinked, it didn't. I smashed the mirror. Glass everywhere. But in every shard I saw the same face. Mine, smiling. I taped over every reflective surface in my apartment. Laptop screen, windows, even my phone camera. But sometimes I still catch movement in the corner of my eye. That's why I'm writing this here, because I don't know what else to do. I found this subreddit while searching for similar stories. I needed someone to tell me, I'm not insane. If you ever find a listing for a cabin on Hollow Creek Road, don't go. If you've already been there, burn your clothes, break your mirrors, and never go near the woods again. I think it follows through reflections, through memories, through the part of you that wants silence. Because sometimes silence isn't empty. It's waiting. We found the Reddit account Ethan_Cole89 still active, but no further posts. According to local records, there's no one by that name residing in Vermont or New York. The cabin at Hollow Creek burned down in 2019 after a missing person case. Investigators found 2 identical journals at the scene, both written in the same handwriting, both signed Ethan Cole.